This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Yorta Yorta people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Every wine is unique, and every season is unique, and every row and every vine will perform in its own way each time around. So the challenge is to try and create something the best it can be given that variability.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Rolly Milhinch has a long family history in Rutherglen. The words deep roots, new shoots are used to describe Scion, his wine brand. But Scion is more than just another small winery. It's a visionary beacon, one that's reimagining and reshaping a landscape and a legacy. Hi Rolly, thanks for joining me.
Hi Shanteh, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks. How are you on this glorious day?
Yeah, I'm good. It's excellent. We've almost finished pruning for the season, which is good. The sun's out, the birds are chirping, spring's nearly here. So things are great in Rutherglen today.
I love that. And it is. It's kind of a time when we're starting to think about moving on to the next season, which I think is, and especially spring. I love spring when everything's kind of, emerging and kind of blossoming.
It is. It's a reminder that nature's in control, which we love, and I think it brings energy. We get excited. We're finishing off wines from earlier in the year in some cases, and the new ones are just beginning, so it's a good time.
There's not really a moment where there's a downtime where there's nothing happening in a winery, is there?
Well, no, it's pretty busy, which we love. That's why we do it. There's a little window after vintage. We try and pre-plan a holiday, so we do take a break. That's pretty important. But no, all year round, it's all go. We have a customer-facing element to the business too with cellar doors, so that's open every day, so that doesn't stop. But with respect to winemaking and viticulture, yeah, we can sneak in a month generally in May, which is good. It's a good time of the year. The heat in the summer's left us. Winter's not quite here. It's a beautiful fringe season.
I love that. I'm going to circle back to your cellar door, but first I want to kind of start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Melbourne. I loved it. I grew up in the northeastern suburbs. We weren't far from the Yarra River. So as a kid, we had a really bumpy, potholey road at the end of our street, and all us kids would go down there with bikes and buzz around. And as a kid, it was great. We were pretty close to nature at the same time. So whilst we were in the city, it wasn't, the city concrete jungle you'd think. It was brilliant. I went through school down there, went through high school there, university. I studied at Monash in graphic design of all things, which I loved and still reflect on today. It has a lot to do with current day work, interestingly enough. And then moved up to Rutherglen in about 2005. It was over about 18 to 24 months that I sort of slowly transitioned up, and here I am.
So amazing that you studied, like you said, graphic design, which you can clearly see in your brand today. But tell me a little bit about why the move to Rutherglen and a little bit about the history of your family in the region.
So the move to Rutherglen came about, it was all very serendipitous, I suppose, in that I hadn't planned to move to Rutherglen, and 3 years prior to moving up physically, I'd sort of moved up in spirit in that we planted a little vineyard. Mum and I planted that. We got some uni mates to come up and toil away and put vines in the ground, and that was all fine. But 3 years later, the reality to maybe take what were our first crop through to a finished wine was there. And I remember at uni reading a quote that to risk nothing risks everything, and it stuck with me. And I thought, you know what, at 23, why can't I do that? And if it doesn't work out, I can go back to doing what I'm currently doing. So it happened because I didn't want to let an opportunity pass, and that's in part why I'm here. The other reason, Rutherglen, I suppose it could have been a few places around the country, but Rutherglen for my family's got some long history in viticulture and winemaking with the Morris family. George Francis Morris, who was set up Fairfield Vineyard in 1859, was a huge concern back in the day in the 1870s to 90s. It was one of the biggest wineries in the Southern Hemisphere, and through his, I guess, entrepreneurial spirit, his risk-taking, he founded and built this. It was a real empire in its time, and I suppose that link is also quite inspiring in that you can do things in a way you have a vision for and have success. So that, I guess, little link is important to me personally, and it also is part of our little story, I guess, in Rutherglen's in our move to Rutherglen.
Yeah, very important family lineage, and wonderful that you celebrate it today. Tell me a little bit about that first vintage and the first wine that you ever made.
So it was a very interesting thing. It was new to me. I'm self-taught as a winemaker and vigneron and viticulture, and so in that, I had no idea what was going on. It was all very intense. I guess you watch these little vines produce small bunches of grapes, and they were little at the time because it was the drought. It was a millennial drought in the early thousands when we planted, and things were little. They didn't grow much. They really struggled, and we ended up with a very small crop of Giriffe in 2004. And for the first few years, we had that wine contract made because we had no facilities and no idea. It wasn't until 2010 I made my first wine under the guidance with a few friends who said, just don't do this. Do everything else, but don't do these things because they'll get you in a bit of trouble. And it was a case of, as the vineyard matured, so did some of our skills and our facilities. And here we are. We've built a winery and a cellar door that facilitates all processes. But in the early days, it was pretty hard work. I remember one of the things that was new to me was cooling a ferment, because that's apparently what you had to do. And we had no refrigeration. So I remember I had a look around the property, and there was an old 44-gallon drum, and there was an old washing machine pump that was lying around. And I figured out that if I kept cold water in that, I could circulate it around the ferments. And so I went down to the local service station. They had an bagged ice facility there, and I called the guy who owned that facility about half an hour up the road, and he agreed to sell me wholesale ice. So I'd go there every 3 days, fill up my ute tray with ice in bags, and then drive it back home. I'd put the bags in the 44-gallon drum with water, and I'd salt it using high amounts of salt because I've read that helps keep the water cooler. And we cooled our ferments using that pretty archaic practice for the first couple of years. And then, as the business establishes, you can afford some equipment. So we went that way. But yeah, it was all very much DIY, and each process was the learning of it developed through necessity, and the way to solve the problem was very DIY, like really DIY. So it's been a journey of first principles, that's for sure.
It's actually not too far removed from what the great Maurice O'Shea did a long time ago by kind of seeking out, trying to get cheaper ice and to cool a ferment. And I have to say, in a restaurant setting, there has been many a times where, a slurry of ice with a bit of salt in it has cooled down some champagne, or more importantly, the beers for after service. So it's a skill that is very, very important.
100%. I think you can get a bottle of champagne down to temperature in about 16 minutes with ice and water and salt. You're winning. That's a good thing for life, I reckon.
I totally agree. I want to ask you a little bit about the beginnings of Scion. Being the background that you said in marketing, what came first? Did you have an idea of what you wanted Scion to be? Did you have a vision of your brand and kind of start with that, and then kind of the wines came along after? Or did you were the grapes kind of the incentive? Tell me how you start a brand with your background.
Yeah, it's a good question. It goes to the core of everything we still do today, and it was certainly a big part of what the decisions we made even before planting. It came down to the hill that we're on itself, and so fundamentally we had a vision to take what's really traditional for our region. That's proven that in a grape growing sense that the varieties and the rootstocks we work with work well, and that's fundamental. And knowing that those grape varieties we really had a passion for, being Durif and Muscat and Viognier, which is what we planted, using those varieties, what makes them thrive irrespective of the clone and rootstock in the region. And we found a hill, and it's a north-facing hill. It's got a gentle gradient, and it's amazing because we've got different sorts of soil type, and we've got different temperatures that seem to happen over the season, and we get basically within a small block wonderful consistency of sun and temperature, but we get variability of soil profile, so it gives lots of winemaking options. And that's all under this idea of how do we take what is really known and does well in Rutherglen, but not deliver that? How do we deliver something that's building on some of these ideas, or I guess sidetracking them a little bit in the interest of learning, experimentation, delivering something unique to followers of the region and wine in general. So essentially, the vision was let's take the tradition and not deliver it. What site's going to work? And we found this beautiful hill, and then from there everything kind of falls into place. If we have this as a grounding principle, then the way the product looks when it's on a shelf, the way that some of the winemaking techniques can be used to deliver what is a vision, then it really makes a lot of sense. And so decisions become straightforward, they're clear, there's focus in all of them. And I think among the different decisions you do make, I guess resulting in the finished wines that we have in our little portfolio, there's a consistency of the way they message to the drinker and the way that they all work as a little group. So vision was first and everything else followed.
I mean, like you said, I think Rutherglen is such a special region, and the history is so, detailed and important for our country. So it's wonderful to kind of hear that, that's kind of what was really important to you at the start. And it must be difficult kind of releasing wines that are made a bit differently in the space you're in. Did you come up against any challenges in those first few vintages making wine differently than how people were making them in the region?
Oh, absolutely. And we still are. I mean, I think it's that every wine is unique, and every season is unique, and every row and every vine will perform in its own way each time around. So the challenge is to try and create something the best it can be given that variability. And that's with respect to, I guess, developing our little brand, and I guess having an identity that grew in the community and then more broadly in the wine community. Of course, there's lots of challenge. There's challenge in moving to a rural area from the city. That in itself, at the time, was a big one for me. It took a while to really find my feet, which is a good thing as well, but that was challenging. And of course, when there's a new little brand that looks a bit different in how it's marketed and the wines are a little bit left of the centre, then yeah, of course, people sort of go, oh, what are these guys doing, But over time, there's a really great respect for the fact there is difference in our region. We've got we're up to, I think, 8 generations now with some of our producers, some of my colleagues, and that's remarkable. And whilst some of the local brands speak for tradition, that's a strength for someone like me who, I guess, uses tradition as a base to launch from. I think we show each other as special. If we're all the same, there would be, and homogenised in this idea, it wouldn't be very exciting. So I think some people might say, oh, are you competing? Is it hard when you're not like the usual sort of mix? But that's actually the strength. I think being a small region and you see everyone down at the supermarket every other night, it's a tiny little town. The ability for us to celebrate the fact we're different is what we do, and it works well for us. So it's a real positive thing. And I think the notion of having to find your place, the notion that, when you first set up, it's not all roses from day one. That's great because it really sorts you out. I think it It builds a bit of resilience, and it's quite humbling. I think wine's an industry that's led by ego, really. It's all about the winemaker and this sort of thing, which is, I guess, one of the necessities of getting wine to market in some senses, but it doesn't go far in small communities. What's important is to, I think, be pretty humble in what you're trying to do, and just do it with a healthy respect for what's around, but do it with your own vision, and that's hopefully how we're perceived in that sense. It's certainly what drives me anyway.
I think often when I visit a region, I like to listen to how other wineries speak about their colleagues and speak about cellar doors, and just, in general, the community kind of spirit. And one thing I really noticed about the Rutherglen was the respect that a lot of your colleagues would pay you and talk about, you've got to visit this cellar door while you're here. It's amazing. And that really says a lot to me about the spirit and the community of the region, but also about how much they respect what you're doing and for things that you were doing differently, which is wonderful. I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of varieties, particular Muscat and Durif, but maybe Viognier, if you want to speak about that. I want to talk about, if you could maybe describe a little bit about the varieties themselves from your perspective, but also then how you approach and pop them into bottle.
Well, the two iconic varieties of region, whether you visit it or not, go with the term Rutherglen are Durif and Muscat. And they've both been here for ages. Durif's been here for over 100 and I think it's about 13 years now. Muscat, similar story. So they're set up to speak of the region's strengths, which is our weather and our soil profiles and the way in which we make wine. Both varieties like warmth, they like sun, they like to be ripe, and they offer, for me, the ability to make a few different things from that one grape. Durif in particular, so that arrived here off the back of phylloxera devastating Australia's wine regions, and it was procured from Montpellier. Dr. Francois Durif came up with the variety, named it after himself, as you do, and it's a combination of Syrah and Pelourson. And these two varieties have got an interesting parentage in themselves, but when it was delivered to Rutherglen, it was thought that it would resist phylloxera. There was little known about it, but of course, in the end, phylloxera claimed it. But in the Rutherglen Research Institute down the road, which is in Australia's wine history, is a phenomenal facility that's little known, but they managed to keep a lot of these varieties surviving because they were able to quickly regraft onto then what was understood to resist phylloxera, American rootstock, to keep them growing. And that's what happened. So the history of these varieties is important, I guess, in a romantic sense in Rutherglen, but as they're proven to work so well here, they've helped develop the identity of the region. I guess we think about really rich, intense red wine for Durif. We think about big tannin, very dry wines. They're often very rustic from Rutherglen. They're earthen. They have a lot of power, and they're typically very ripe. It's a late ripening grape, which is why it thrives in this region with a lot of warmth and a lot of sun. And so when it comes to see them on the table in a glass, we think winter, fireside, everything big, and that's delicious. There's a lot of really healthy interest for that style. However, for me, when I look at the grape, I think about things like its texture, so its tannin. Texture for me in, say, something like rosé is really important. We make rosé with Durif. It's handpicked just to do this wine because that natural tannin Durif has in its DNA provides this lovely savoury underlying quality for the rosé. And when the fruit's picked by hand really early, I'm talking absolutely suboptimally for any dry red, it's barely ripe, but we have good natural acidity. We have this lovely wave of savoury nuance through the tannin, which is subtle, but we have the brightest, freshest red fruit. And so we take it early off the vine for rosé. Then if we start to think about the way the variety profiles aromatically, it can be quite perfumed. I think when it gets very ripe, it's more rustic and more fruit driven, but when it's in this middle zone, it has this lovely, we see in our vineyard, cherry plum as a character. We see this lifted violet nuance. We see all these wonderful aromatic, savoury and herbal qualities sitting behind this bright red fruit. And so for me, using stem in ferment really can help show off this character that Durif has inherently. So then there's versatility in winemaking. And then one of the reasons it really became popular in Rutherglen was back in the day when fortifieds were what we did. You know, table wine in Australia wasn't drunk like it is now. And the fortified wine styles of your port styles, Durif was a cornerstone of that in region. It delivers high colour, high tannin, and if we think to Portuguese varieties, which often exhibit that for fortifieds, Durif was perfect. So we in fact do reference that tradition in Rutherglen by fortifying it, but in a Bagnol style, a Southern French style, which doesn't use oak, it doesn't use brandy. So there's 3 uses for Durif for me, and then some. We do a lot of experimentation with the variety, and like with Muscat, it's synonymous with a very sweet dessert wine, high sugar. It's fortified, so high alcohol. All of that delivers the most unctuous drink in the world. It's revered as the richest wine. It's a phenomenal thing, naturally vine ripened, but we pick it really early. We make a dry white wine with Muscat that's really textural, and we also make a very lightly fortified, moderately picked with moderate sugar to make a very delicate dessert wine, a cocktail mixer, a very, I guess, aromatic and quite a sensuous style of Muscat that doesn't deliver the power of sweetness we're used to. So traditional varieties, versatile, just, you know, as far as your vision goes is where these grapes can go, and they grow so well here.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm so glad to see you speak about them in that way, because they are varieties that are kind of unlike anything else. And I often talk to people first about what Muscat is like in the vineyard, because I said once you've tasted a Muscat grape off the vine, you'll never forget it again. They're some of the most delicious bursts of kind of flavour that you're ever going to have. What's your approach with making, because you make a few different Muscats, don't you?
That's right. So we have 2 varieties of Muscat. One is what is considered Rutherglen brown Muscat. It's the ruby-skinned, white-fleshed grape that everyone knows and loves. It's sweet. It's like you say, when you eat this off the vine, it is the most delicious thing you'll ever taste. And that's not an exaggeration. We've had customers we've taken to the vineyard. My vineyard guys, they just are eating it all day when they're working in there. Our dogs run down and eat it off the vine. Everyone loves that Muscat. But we've also got a really unusual white variety of Muscat, and there's many varieties around the world. This one's orange Muscat, and it's a white grape. It's harvested really early. It's the first one we pick at the start of February. And whilst it doesn't have colour, it's a white, it has everything in common with the Muscat you described, where we think about something floral. And these are terpene-driven varieties. Everything about them is in the nose. And for me in the winery, the aroma of the wine is 90% of the experience. Whether we think about it or not, you can open a bottle of these wines, and when they're sitting in the glass, that perfume will deliver itself around a table, and people are nearly drinking it before they've even seen it. And I think both the varieties we have, they're fundamental to the identities of those wines, but in the vineyard, they're just like they taste in the glass. They're phenomenal things, very unlike any other grape I've worked with, for sure.
So cool. And I think your wines really, really showcase the beauty of both those varieties in a traditional sense, but they're also just so exciting, and they make you think, which is great. I mean, I think it's meant to be delicious, first of all, when we make wine and when we drink it, but it's great when it's not only absolutely delicious, but it also gets your brain going, and you've got questions. And immediately drinking your wines, I was like, I've got so many questions I want answered, and how have they done that? And I just think that's so exciting. But I want to know tell me a little bit about how you decided on the name Scion.
But it's a funny one. So when we established our little business, I say we because it was Mum and I. We both, I grew up drinking wine with both Mum and Dad. They were passionate, I guess, hobbyist wine lovers. And in later life, Mum decided, maybe we could give viticulture a go. And so we drink a lot together. And as it turned out, that one of the reasons I moved up was to work with her to start this little brand. And took a while to think of something, a name that would represent what we do, because it's pretty important. And when people haven't tasted your wine, I guess the idea of the brand and how it presents is everything. And the name Scion, it means two things, and it references why we're here and what we do, why we do what we do. The first meaning is a horticultural meaning, and whether we're in a nursery or in our case in a vineyard, it talks to the idea of grafting. And when we're grafting a plant, a new shoot onto an existing plant, and in the case of a vineyard, it's having a rootstock in some instances that suit a place, and we graft onto that the variety we would like to grow. The fusion of where the graft and the existing roots meet, the fusion of old and new growth, is called the Scion. And if we then, I guess, step back and think about what we're trying to achieve in the winery, it's exactly that. We're taking traditional varieties and riffing around them to create something that is of a different vision, something very contemporary. It also pertains to, I guess, family lineage. A Scion is generally someone within a notable family that's coming through those ranks. It's the next generation, and so it also talks about my history with the Morris clan up here. So it's got a dual meaning, and I think importantly, it's just about how something exists to be something different. But the end result can't happen without both those two things. You can't have something innovative, engaging without, I guess, a cornerstone that it's been born out of. So it also, I think, for me particularly, it offers respect to what is traditional as much as it does something that's new and different. It's both of them that make that happen. So, yeah, that's why we settled on the name, and I guess it's a curious name. But we're really proud of it. It certainly suits our vision perfectly.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, I can't imagine, trying to find a name and coming across something and then seeing that word in, like you said, in some viticultural books, and then also, then seeing it again and going, oh my gosh, it must have been one of those moments where you're like, that's it. And it's just a light bulb moment, and it all comes together, which I think is so cool. And it rolls off the tongue beautifully. Excuse me. I also want to talk about your cellar door. Gourmet Traveller Best Cellar Door awarded a couple of years ago.
Yes, 2022, I think. We've picked that up a few times over the years, yeah.
Probably one of the most engaging, exciting cellar door experiences I've ever had. And I get to a few, and I really, really loved it. I want to say a couple of things about it. First off, and that is that I tend to not like to do too much research before I go and visit somebody for the first time, because I really want to have that first experience and not know too much and discover it along the way, just like a guest would when they walk in a door somewhere. And the first thing that I noticed when we pulled up was that you had a Tesla charging station right out the front, and then you had Sasha, your beautiful pup, that greeted us as we got off the bus. And the more I found out about you and what you do at Scion, I thought this is the perfect example of old world meets new world meets, amazing foresight, but also has the spirit of what, a family and a legacy is all about. So that was really cool. But the cellar door is amazing. It's very minimalist in the way that it's decorated and the decor. What I noticed was that because of that minimalist framework, what you notice when you're sitting down and look around is the crazy colours that you have in the glasses of the wine that's being poured. So the hero of the whole place is what you're doing, and the glass and these beautiful, gorgeous kind of thin framed glasses, and then just these vibrant colours. So you're looking at the bottle and the glasses and that's what's drawing your attention. It's so cool.
Thanks for that feedback. It's really great to hear because it's exactly what we tried to achieve. The cellar door is so simple. It's a galvanised shed. When we built it back in 2005, it was just that. It was from a kit. It's got quite a tall 35-degree pitch. It's like 9 by 9 metres. And then off the back of that, we tacked on another little space that we had a few barrels in, and slowly been extended over the years. But the cellar door itself, it's designed to really speak of the idea Scion in the same sense. The old is the corrugated facade that you see when you walk in. It's reminiscent of what is an Australian country shed. It's as simple as that. But of course, you walk through the door and it's then designed to be very, very simple and very thoughtful in the way the light moves through the room, the way that when you're sitting, all aspects are framed by glass, whether it's down into the élevage cellar where all the barrels are, whether it's down the fermentation wing, whether you turn around just to see where you are sitting in this little lee of the hill, and then you're looking out against remnant grey box. The grey box we've then taken into the cellar door, and it forms the leading edge of our cellar door tasting bench. So it referencing place, and then the bulk of the tasting bench is just a white surface, and with all the natural light we're able to bring into the space through the double glazing and overhead skylighting, it is about the wine experience. It's about embellishing that and allowing you to engage with it. And I suppose in referencing the idea that with muscat, we taste it when we're smelling it. I think, like with all wine, whether we're acknowledging it or not, we're drinking it when we're looking at it, and the colour is so important. Vitality, hues that speak of the way the flavours might profile, all of that's really important. So if we can offer that to people if they want to engage with it, or suggest they should when they're not considering it, the space delivers that. And of course, if we start to then clutter that space up with other bits and bobs, maybe the focus wouldn't be on the wine as much. And it's not to say it's all about wine. The wine hopefully guides people tasting to be all about the space and who they're with at the same time. So it's a relationship between what we're making, where it's made, why it's made, and the people that are enjoying it. And yeah, thanks for that feedback. It's exactly what we were hoping to achieve with the space, and we're so proud of it. It talks of what we're doing. I mean, the fundamental brief we had in our mind was, how can the space engage with all the ideas we have without our staff or us having to convey them verbally? So we wanted the space to be able to reflect how the wine was made and where, because you can see that from where you're sitting in the tasting area. And it needed to represent, I guess, the contemporary nature of the wine. So the space is a lot of white, glass, wood, brass, and it's got some angular form, so it's quite clean and modern in that sense. But hopefully it's fairly humble. It's a galvanised shed. It's not fancy from the outside.
I think you've absolutely nailed that, and especially when you said about non-verbal, because when I sat in there and I was looking at the people that were tasting and then having a drink, I thought, gosh, I never say this, but this is somewhere I would like to be seen at, which is just something that I thought, ooh, I've never said that. Like in my brain, I was thinking, gross. And I was like, why? And then I went, why do you think that? And I thought, well, it feels trendy, but at the end of the day, it came down to the fact that I was like, I feel relaxed here. I feel like I've sat back and I've just had this like wave of relaxation and also kind of just easy living. And I think it says a little bit about you too, because I felt like you could come into that cellar door with grubby shoes on if you just had a big day, have a Negroni or a gin and tonic or something like that, and just like chill out with your mates. You could also have a really kind of formal tasting where you went through every vintage you've ever made and, have a bit of a masterclass as well. And I think it just said a little bit about how you approach things, but you get a real vibe when you're in there. And that is why it's such an important must visit when you're in the Rutherglen, but also just a joy to be at.
Well, thank you. That's super kind. I mean, and it's exactly how the place operates. We see all kinds of great people, whether they're there to enjoy catching up with their friends. They might have met, Canberra friends. They're from Melbourne. They meet halfway in Rutherglen. That's a common theme. So they just want to hang out, catch up, enjoy wine. Or we might have people we're hosting who want technical information. They want to look at back vintages. They want to link season to what they're tasting, and then we see people who just love wine. They don't know why, they just love it. And if it appeals to them, great, they buy it and have a good time. So we see a real mix, and of course the space needs to work for all those people. It's a space that complements wine, and hopefully that the wine complements the people who visit. So we love it actually, and it's good fun. Whenever we don't close often, it might be 3 or 4 days a year, and sometimes it's because we're having a staff do. We're all patting ourselves on the back or celebrating something. We close and we sit in a space, and we really enjoy it when it's not working for the business, when we get to have it for ourselves as well. We just love it.
Well, that's really important to do, because we all know that it's, a lot of teamwork to have a successful cellar door or a successful business. So it's so important that you do get to enjoy the space. And like you said, hopefully they associate it with some good times as well as hard work. I want to ask you, just to find out a little bit more about your palate. Riley, if you had to drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
Oh, it's such a tricky one. For me, you can't beat a cleansing ale. It's just an unbeatable thing on a hot summer's day after doing a lot of wine tasting. A cleansing lager I'm good for every day of the week. I like the maltiness, the simplicity of a lager, and I'm good for a lager all times. They punctuate the end of the day nearly every night, and it's certainly, after some long days of tasting, it's a go-to. I guess to drink something for the rest of your life is a massive call. So I suppose it does warrant a little bit of thinking. What I love is Viognier as a dry white wine. I find it such an engaging, complex wine. It manifests place like no other. It shows where it's from, and particularly Condrieu, in France, the home of Viognier. For me, I'd drink something from Andre Perret. He's regarded as one of the world's, best Viognier producers, and we see that in those wines, and they're inspirational for me. So something from Andre Perret. And then I guess one of the things we drink most at home between my partner and I, and when we're celebrating, when we feel like it, is champagne. Can't beat it. And I think I've got some great memories of drinking Le Mandier Bernier as a producer in all around the place, and anything from him from those guys. But the Longitude is a favourite of ours. It's a well-priced, French bubbles. It's delicious. It's got fairly low dosage, so it's got great structure. It's a wine that is complex if you want to think about it, but it can be used just to celebrate with at the same time. So I think those 3 for me, hard to beat, and I'd happily drink them forevermore. No two ways. Yeah.
I love that. And I definitely the first person to say Viognier, but I love the way that you speak about it, and I really like the way that you make it as well. So, Riley, if I had to pick one word, I'd say today has been illuminating, which is the same way I feel about your wines as well. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I always learn so much, and I'm inspired when I chat with you, and I can't wait till our paths cross again.
Well, thank you, Shanteh. It's been wonderful. It's been a great to talk, and thanks so much for inviting me on. It's been great. Thank you.
Cheers to you. Thanks, Riley.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod, and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.